Yeah, welcome to my new moon reading for July. So in July this time of transition continues, and we have actually also a card of transition, the Charon, the King of Water, the King of Cups in tarot, is one of the cards that I've pulled, and Charon is the one that accompanies those that are dead across the river Styx. Also the cards say it is a time of transition, and in this time of transition we are called with roots, with greed, with Jupiter, with moon and with change, not to act out of our wounded child, but to act out of the nourishing mother that is in every one of us, whether we are male or female or non-binary. There is the archetype of the mother in us, the sacred, nourishing mother. And we will be confronted with the wounded child. What we will also see in the horoscope, that we will confronted with both, with the fulfillment, the abundance of the great mother, but also with the woundedness of the wounded child, the screaming of the wounded child. And with greed, this means that this wounded child can be very violent against others and against ourselves. Out of our woundedness, we never have enough. Others never do enough. Life is never good enough. And to remind ourselves that there is a place in us that is always sacred, that was never hurt, and that this part exists, and that we actively can call this part in, and that we are called to do that, and that we are called to root us anew, to ground us anew with this new moon. We had this full moon in Capricorn where there was a faded change in our structures, especially in relationships and in our intimate calling. But now it is a time of, but what does this emotionally mean and change? And I would say this new moon is a moon of I have to adapt to the new. And this is not easy because the wounded child is screaming, and we have to learn that we are always nourished, and that this is not spiritual blah blah, but that we can reconnect with the part that is nourished. And even if we don't feel it, we can actively look for it. We can take a walk in nature. We can, eat good food. We sometimes think we are so exhausted that we need something big, but actually most of the time the simple things are the things where we feel re-strengthened, where we feel stronger again, refreshed again. It doesn't have to be the big thing. The biggest thing that is needed is our awareness with ourselves. Like Thich Nhat Hanh once said, we are never alone when we connect with ourselves through our breath, that our breath takes us home to ourselves and to our sacred place. I will also link this video down below of Thich Nhat Hanh, where he talks about the end of our loneliness. And with Cancer and with these cards and what I see in the astrology, I would say it is wise to act out of our nourished self. That doesn't mean that we never can be exhausted or never be in the wounded child, but to be determined to act out of this nourishment. And then if we act out of this nourishment, we will ground much easier into the new, what we are called to do by destiny. And I will now have a look at the astrology. And in the astrology we have again a biquintile that is going on. And this biquintile is going on between Neptune, Pallas Athena, and the conjunction between Venus and Mars. I mean, we had during the full moon, we already had a wide conjunction with Venus in Cancer and Mars in Leo, but now we have a really close conjunction between Mars and Venus in Leo. And it is in a biquintile to Neptune. So there is something really faded coming out of the invisible realms, coming in to nourish our relationships anew. And these relationships are in opposition to Saturn. We are nourished, but we might not feel nourished. A conjunction means there is a union between Venus and Mars. There is a possibility of reuniting or uniting with your loved ones, uniting your inner feminine and masculine forces, But with Saturn, there is adaptation needed, there is maturity needed, what I talked in the cards before. This maturity to call in the nourishment of the Great Mother, to sit with the archetype of the Great Mother. Every morning to call her in and to be determined that I will act out of nourishment and that I'm whole, and not acting out of my wounded and therefore violent child. Because in the end, as Gabo Mate often said, the trigger is not the ammunition. So yes, we might be wounded, but if we act out of woundedness, then we can be very, very violent. And I would say the history of humanity gives proof to that, that out of inner balance and out of feeling nourished, we usually don't get into war with other people. And this goes on in the whole horoscope, because we also have a trine, which is beautiful, between Chiron and Venus and Mars. So there is an invitation for healing, that with Chiron we can heal in our relationships, but Chiron is also squaring the moon and the sun. So it is an invitation to be healed, and healing out of divine grace can happen, but we have to dare to be vulnerable. We have to dare to be vulnerable with ourselves and with others. We have to dare to be truthful without being violent. What I mean by that is, for example, if I feel I'm hurt, then being courageous enough to talk about that honestly, without expecting too much from others, being courageous enough to be vulnerable and to trust that out of this vulnerability you will see who your true friend is or who your true lover is. Because with the opposition to Pluto, there might be a danger of power struggles. There might be some people who try to overpower us, but to trust that in our vulnerability we are stronger than we think. Because sometimes we mix vulnerability with weakness. Like Brené Brown says, vulnerability is our biggest strength. And in our vulnerability, we are actually very, very strong. We are in our nourishment, in our sovereign queen that is able to hold her truth and to know her truth and to defend her truth without the violence of the wounded child. So I would say it is a new moon of adapting to the new, and that there are possibilities or events of great healing or of comfort and of nourishment and of abundance, but there are also events of where your maturity is called. There are these mixed messages between being wounded and being healed. I would interpret this chart of this new moon that this new moon is telling us you need to be courageous enough to be vulnerable, and in this vulnerability you will heal. You will heal others and you will heal yourself, and to trust that vulnerability is strength, and to set yourself free from the old boundaries, the old limitations. Sometimes Cancer is also the past, that your past held us hostile. And finally, Mercury is trining Jupiter, so I would say think big. There is a huge possibility to have good communication in this vulnerability. And Pluto, which is opposing the Sun and the Moon, is also still conjunct Ishtar. So this reminder that in our true queen, we are always sovereign. We don't need our insignia. We don't need to prove anything to anyone. And out of this being sovereign, we can be free and we can be courageous enough to be vulnerable. So I wish you the strength to be open to your own vulnerability that will in the end heal you and will heal your life and your relationships. So I hope this was helpful. I wish you a wonderful Cancer full moon. Till next time, namaste.